Hey guys, we're back for our second video. Um, Same thing's gonna happen again. Um, I'm gonna have music behind me that's playing the style that we're gonna learn about. Um, I'm gonna tell you some stuff about the style of music and where I am. Il Valley. So there's gonna be more about this one, just because everybody knows about it more than they did blues. Like I said in my last video, we're learning about jazz. Um, Again, there's so many types of jazz. Um, I guess I should start off with where I am. So this place is important to jazz. It is one of the main places that you're going to hear jazz if you go there. Just like Bill Street with blues, whenever you walk down Bill Street, you're going to hear blues all the way down Bill Street. This is New Orleans during Mardi Gras. And as you can see right here, there's some like people playing probably jazz, if I was guessing, because this is during Mardi Gras. So I'm naming her Betsy. She's taking a picture of my head. But yeah, they're probably playing jazz, if I was guessing. That's what New Orleans is known for. Louisiana in general is known for their jazz music. It's another kind of Southern type of music. Jazz kind of came out of blues music. It's a type of blues, honestly. Jazz didn't influence or cause other types of music to become what they are today, but it did help some of them. It has also become a bigger style of music. So, you ready to learn about some jazz? I know we have one song in the musical that is jazz-like, I believe. I might be thinking of the blues song, but yeah, I can't remember what it's called. Oh, okay, so jazz music started with blues music. I'm gonna turn this down. Yeah, there we go. Maybe I'm just hearing that. There we go. Okay. It is a mix of different types of music. So, jazz music. Whenever you think about jazz, you think about blues because they go hand in hand. They're kind of the same thing but different. So, blues was made with people that were telling stories and wanting to share their emotions with others. Jazz music is kind of made the same way, but it had different. It pulled. There we go. It pulled from different other styles. It pulled from other styles of music. There we go. Like gospel, the kind of music you sing in church. Gospel music, brass band. We know what brass instruments are. I'm going to show you one here in a second. Brass, remember, it's the ones that are made out of metal. So tubas and trombones and baritones and trumpets, all those kinds. It was made out of gospel brass bands, African music, because remember, these were slaves that were making this kind of music, and that's where they came from. So they kind of pulled from the African style from where they came from. They pulled from blues, like I've said. Spanish music, because we're down in New Orleans now. And Louisiana is kind of close to Mexico a little bit. And there was still some Spanish type things that were happening there. So they pulled from some of their music too. So it's kind of all of this music just put into one. And it's formed jazz. So blues music, if you watch the other video, it has to do with the story of the song. It has to do with the emotions that the people were feeling when they made the song. Jazz music was made with instruments. You can still feel those emotions through instruments, but not as much as if you were talking or singing words. So it was more about the instruments. It was more about the rhythms that were going on. Remember, beat and rhythms. Rhythms are the ones that stop. Beats keep going and going and going and going and never stop. Remember, it's like you're walking. Rhythms do stop. They take little breaks. So whenever jazz is about instruments, we talked about this in the last video. You've heard this word, improvise, made up. This is what jazz is all about, because we don't have those words. We don't have those things to go off of. We need to make up stuff. We need to make it interesting. We need to make it fun, right? So they improvised way more. You had a whole band behind you, or like these guys, two of those guys, there's three guys, two of those guys will be making something up. No, they would be doing the same thing. They would be playing the same thing over and over and over and over, repeating themselves over and over and over, like I do all the time. One of those guys, probably the guitarist, is making stuff up as he goes to make it sound cool, to make it fun, to make it their own song. And that's what jazz is about. Jazz songs was made to be made up. You had a band behind you, so probably saxophones, guitars, drums, anything they could pull out on the street, because they would play these on the street in New Orleans and Louisiana. They would pull out these instruments on the street and they just make stuff up. So the band behind you would be playing the same thing over and over and over. And one person would be making something up to make it a little bit different each time. And then it would switch. So say the saxophone was making something up and the rest of the band was playing the same thing. And then that saxophone would start playing the same thing as the band, and the guitar would start making something up. And then the guitar would join back in, and the drummer would start going crazy on the drums. That's what it was about. It was about making it up. It was about improvising. That's what jazz is all about, is improvising, making it up. So jazz started after blues. Remember, blues is what made jazz. So jazz was made in the late 1800s. And then it really became popular in the 1900s. 1920. That was 100 years ago. 1920s. It was like pop music. Everybody loved jazz music. They loved it. They loved dancing to it. They loved hearing it. They loved it. It was all around America. This is only in America. It was so popular in America. There was another thing going on at that time that made it made people not happy. Some people not happy. And so these places started popping up, and they were called speakeasies. But in the speakeasies, these people would go into these speakeasies and they would hear jazz and they would dance to them and they would get to have fun. They were like little parties that they could go to. And they would hear this jazz music, and that's what made it so popular. It was just kind of one of those things that it was like every time you hear Lil Nas X now, every time you hear Billie Eilish, every time you hear one of those, it was like that for them. You hear it out in a restaurant or whatever. It was like that. They would go to these places and they would listen to jazz music and they would dance to jazz music and they would just have fun listening to it. It was the music of the century. It was so popular in the 1920s that the people that studied history back then called it the Jazz Age. It was so popular, it got named, the 1920s got named the Jazz Age because jazz was so popular. Um, it really, during the 1920s, it was more popular. It was popular all over America, but you would really hear it in New Orleans, all the way to Chicago, so all the way up north. So Louisiana, all the way up north to America. And then from Chicago all the way over to New York City. It was all around. It was so popular. It was all over America. And you would hear it all at these speakeasies, at these places. That's where you would hear it at. There were some places in Mississippi, because remember, this is kind of, it started off in the South. In Mississippi, there were steamboats going down the river. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a boat that runs on steam. At these steamboats in Mississippi would play jazz on board while going down the river. So think, if you've ever seen Princess and the Frog, whenever the crocodile wants to get on that boat, that's a steamboat. Whenever he wants to get on there and play his trumpet, that's what he's wanting to do. He's wanting to join those jazz players on that boat and play music, and play jazz. So at this time, jazz is more, remember, it's more about instruments. It's more about the instruments. But there were singers. I've talked about these singers. I've talked about one of these singers. It's about the bands. There were really famous bands. There were really famous singers. Here's the one that I've talked about. Louis Armstrong, super famous. He was the master of jazz. Duke Ellington was another really famous one. Later in the 1900s, well, 1920s, is whenever women started coming in and singing jazz. So you had Nat King Cole. You had, these aren't as weird as names as the blues type, like T-Bone. Okay. You have Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald. She's a super famous jazz singer. She's known for her scatting. I'll talk about that here in a second. I know I've talked about it in class, but I'll talk about that here in a second. So like blues, jazz kind of made it possible for other types of music to grow. So jazz turned into swing music, which turned into beatbop, which helped, I know it's a weird word, beatbop, which turned into funk music, rock and roll, and hip hop. A little bit rap too. That's what these are. Blues and jazz really helped these kinds of rhythm-based type of music. That's what they were there for. So some weird things about jazz. There's a whole different, not language, but different words that are used whenever with jazz players. Jazz players have their own type of language that they use, and they still use it today, and it makes them seem like weirdos, and maybe they are, but who cares? Who doesn't love a little bit of weirdo? Miss Phillips a weirdo, right? So like I said, I brought up that weird word, scatting. Scatting is that made up, improvising, made up kind of, that kind of thing. It's weird. It's just to add a little bit of flavor in the music. It's for the singer to add their own little thing in there. Whenever the instruments are making stuff up, why can't the singer So they added scatting, which is that that kind of stuff. Singing, I know. They also used weird terms like cool cats. Jazz players are cool cats. They use things like you dig whenever you're playing, and a jazz player looks at you and they say, you dig? They're like, did you like what I did there? Do you like how I made that up? It sounded pretty cool though, right? Instead of saying all that, they just say, you dig? They would call a place a crib. This really comes in handy whenever they're talking about where they're going to play next. Remember, these people are playing on the street. So they would ask, whose crib are we playing at next? They would be wondering whose house they're going to play in front of. Really, in the street. A really popular term right now. Let's go make that bread, right? Let's go make that money. It's really popular right now. Jazz people made that up. Jazz people are the one that started saying that. And it's still popular today. Now just people are starting to say it more. Let's make that bread. Let's get that bread, whatever. Let's make that money. That all came from jazz. There's some weird terms that come from jazz people. That was a little funky. So I'm going to show you guys a couple of instruments because blues is about the singer and about the guitar, sometimes piano, but guitar. Some other instruments that go with jazz, because jazz is all about the instruments. Piano. You've seen a piano before, you know what it looks like. Pianos. Pianos are very important to jazz music, like so important to jazz music. Some other ones that are important that I might not have here is a drum set. I have a few drums here I'm going to show you, but a big drum set. Important to jazz because it's rhythm. It's about rhythm, and that's what makes rhythm the most, is drums. Again, it comes back. It's the guitar. The guitar is so important in jazz. It's because it was made from blues. Jazz was made from blues, so it has to have that little bit of flair in there. So again, you can pull on the string and make the strings whine a little bit. It goes back to blues. A woodwind instrument. We're going to go over the types of instruments again later. A woodwind instrument that's really popular in jazz is a saxophone, which you can hear now. Saxophones are so important. Usually they're the main instruments to make stuff up during a song. I'm not going to play this one. I don't play saxophone, but saxophones are really important to jazz. Brass instruments. I don't have a tuba. Tubas are really important. Tubas are those big ones that go around you and they kind of circle you like a hula hoop. Let me go grab mine. A important instrument in jazz also is called a trombone. It's part of the brass section. I know that the saxophone was made out of metal too. It's a woodwind. I'll talk about it later. But this is made out of brass. It's all metal. You see a little bit of the street there. This is metal, completely metal, all metal. It's a trombone. It's part of the brass section. It has a mouthpiece that is stuck on it. I can't get it off. There's the mouthpiece. You put your mouth on that. Remember, you blow. And you would move the slide. It's called a slide because it slides. And that's how you change the notes. Like I said, you could really just put any instrument into a session with jazz and it be a jazz instrument. There would be string instruments. So, like your guitar, you would have one of those big old bass looking things called a big bass. Those would be on the streets. Um, they would play on buckets. They would play on things that they found in the streets. They would bang on metal posts. They would do whatever they could to make music. It was like back in the blues, whenever they were making these songs up with whatever they were doing at the time, like picking vegetables. That's what they were doing then. They were trying to find every way they could make a sound into a sound. They were banging on metal. Remember, I could said anything could be an instrument. They were banging on metal. They were banging on the concrete down on the sidewalk over here. They would bang on trash cans. They would bang on whatever they could to make any kind of sound, to make a song. Really, that's why drums were so important with jazz music, is because drums are make our rhythm, they make our beat, and that's what jazz is all about. It's about the rhythm, it's about the beat of the song, and then whatever we can add on top, those little improvising or made up little parts on top. Just was like, you have your ice cream and you have your little cherry on top. That's what the improvising did. That's what the other instruments did, was add that little cherry on top. So I'll show you guys the drums some other time, whenever we learn about them. Okay. Yeah. So that's Jess. We'll be at another place next week. Hope you guys are ready. Are you so excited? Bye, guys.